But now that I've had all my snark, what do I honestly think of this story? Well, as I said, Prime is written actually pretty well. I like how the characterizations overall, the biggest one that stands out in terms of not being that great is Prowl's. Simply because Prowl traditionally is the logical tactician, and yet he breaks cover. However, this doesn't seem that unreasonable once we've read everything in context, simply because I get the impression that the Autobots are all getting really antsy because at this point they're basically getting picked off one by the humans, the Transformers that are hiding out on Earth. So they're given the humans work to do, and yeah, things aren't really good for them at all. Do like though that the humans aren't exactly buddy buddy with the Autobots. In a way, it's really a bit of a return to the Marvel days where the humans didn't care who was an Autobot and who was a Decepticon, and that was one of the core themes of the Marvel comics back in the day. However, one thing that they didn't have back in the day, the humans anyway, was weapons that could actually harm the Transformers, which makes things a heck of a lot more interesting. The fact that I really like these mech suits, it reminded me a lot of Macromasters, and quite honestly, I hope we get very little in the way of Decepticons for this first story arc, because I think that the human Autobot dynamic here is honestly quite a bit more interesting. It looks like Mike Costa is going into some different territory in that, well, there's not much to do with the war. The war is over. We need to start up the war again in order to get some action there. But we basically got a bunch of refugees hiding out on a planet that doesn't want them, and half the refugees are saying, "What are we even doing here?" It's kind of like District 9, only the aliens blew up half the planet and then went into hiding instead. And people don't call them prawns. And they're no Christopher Johnson. But yeah, as I said, I quite like the way Optimus Prime is written here. He's very in character. Ironhide is very good as well. And as I prefaced this with the beginning, I wasn't huge on the faces. But I will admit, the faces aren't that bad overall. There's some great shots with the faces where they work pretty well, but I think that the biggest weakness with the faces, the thing I hate the most, is the way Dawn does the mouths. The mouths simply, they're way too over detailed. They take away from the faces, and it just looks like a mess when they open their mouths. Still, it seems that there's more Autobots that are on Earth at this point. We saw Streetwise, and we also had a couple of others referenced as well. We also had Windcharger and Gears referenced, and apparently Skywatch has a number of other Autobots captured. So, really, taking all of this into account, I can kind of see why we had the breakout in character in Prowl. Just because we've got the Autobots getting picked off one by one, and that's going to get to anybody, even if it's a Decepticon. Just the fact that the humans are running around and capturing any Autobot or Decepticon they can get their hands on. And since the war's over, it doesn't really matter who it is, since the Autobots and Decepticons aren't even at war anymore. And also, just in the case of Breakdown, he wasn't going around in the classic Decepticon fashion, I'm gonna destroy your factory and get Energon to refuel Cybertron. No, the way it comes across, it's the classic Decepticon mentality as they laid out in Megatron Origin, the idea that the strong take from the weak. Only in this case, Breakdown is basically going after this plant because it comes across that he's low on fuel and he needs something to survive. So he does it the way that any Decepticon would, blow up a factory and try and get what they're making. Or rather, I guess it's a power plant, but still. Anyway, I like the human Autobot dynamic. The issue overall is, well, Continuum was a disappointment, but I suppose if there was an advantage to Continuum, I guess it's set the bar low. Although this isn't really a low bar story, it's actually pretty interesting. The idea of Prime just giving up and quitting, it's not a new idea, but nobody's ever actually done it before. Usually, when Optimus Prime gets taken out, it's usually a matter of him getting sidelined because he gets his butt kicked or something. But I think this is the first time where we've actually had him quit and surrender and not intend to actually continue to participate in the war. It looks like they're making a deliberate effort to sideline Prime right from day one, which generally make looking at the history of the Decepticons in the Marvel comics, sidelining Prime makes for good stories. Even in the Marvel comics when they killed Prime off for a while, it made for good stories because then you got power plays within the Autobots. Then you got stuff with the Decepticons when Megatron wasn't there. Then you got that very, very fun dynamic where you had Shockwave, Scorponok, Ratbat, all of these guys vying for their own little slice of power. It's more interesting if you don't have the entrenched leaders there. And it's interesting that the Autobots, they don't really seem to know what to do at this point, given that they've lost their war that they've been fighting for who knows how long, and they're getting picked off on this planet they're hiding out on, and they really seem pretty leaderless. I'm interested in where they're going to go with this whole angle of no leader. The way that they're setting this up, Hot Rod is clearly the most viable candidate for a leader here. He's got the most leadership experience, which was 2 missions, both of which people died in, I suppose. Prowl's being a leader, but the problem with Prowl is Prowl's a dick and nobody listens to Prowl. And Ratchet isn't leader material. The next closest is Jazz, and Jazz doesn't want it. Really, what I like here is how Hot Rod is written in that it's consistent with his IDW portrayal in that he seems to have a little more confidence back after that whole double dealer mess. And he seems to be trying to, well, I think he honestly has the right idea here. What are they even doing on Earth in the first place? Quite honestly, I'm not opposed to Prime quitting for the reasons that he does say he quits in this issue. Simply because of the fact that, well, as he said, Prime doesn't know how to fight here. They've kind of established the idea before that each Prime represents a different era of Cybertron, and Optimus Prime was forged in the battlefield. He was the defining element of the Autobot war against the Decepticons, and the war's over. What happens to soldiers when they've got nothing left to fight? Quite honestly, I would be very interested in seeing Rodimus Prime running around, leading the Autobots for some time. I'm very interested to see where this gets them, but I'm even more interested to see, much as I'm interested in the Autobot-human dynamic, you know the Decepticons are coming back into this eventually. They're not just going to stay in Nick Rosh's little corner of the galaxy where the Wreckers are having their last stand against Overload and Co. No, the Decepticons are going to come back. Plus, though they're saying it here that they think Megatron is dead, for those who read the Coda issue, we know he's not dead. He's almost dead, but it's Princess Bride style almost dead in that he can be brought back. And he will be brought back because it's at least 2 years later. So, I can see that Megatron is going to want to return to Earth, if only because of the fact that these little flesh creatures killed him, or near killed him, so he wants his revenge. He just wants to kill these guys. And he doesn't have to worry about tactics or anything that fancy because the war is over. And if Prime happens to be there as well, any side benefit, he can take out the last few remaining Autobots while he's at it. So overall, I would say with this issue of Continuum, not a bad idea to buy it. I'm rather not Continuum, but the ongoing. But yeah, not a bad idea to buy it. I'm very interested in seeing where this thing goes. It might take a few issues, but the first story arc, it could be very good potentially. I really liked Mike Costa on G.I. Joe Cobra, and on that book, it was a bit of a slow build in that once they built, it took a few issues to really get going, and then they unleashed a bombshell on the second last and last issue, which suddenly turned everything upside down and was a holy crap moment. So yeah, I would actually suggest that people buy this, unlike Continuum. Although honestly, it doesn't have the fun element that Transformers has in some continuities like animated. But yeah, until then, this is General Techno signing off.